I spent $95,000 renovating my son's house. I paid for the kitchen remodel, the Brazilian hardwood floors, the master bath with the soaking tub my daughter-in-law had been pinning on Pinterest for 3 years. I paid for all of it because my son told me there was a plan. He said they were going to build a suite in the back, a proper room for me, private entrance, small sitting area, everything I'd need. He said, "Dad, you've been rattling around in that big house for 18 months since Mom passed. Come live with us. We'll make space." So I wrote the check, the way you do when you trust someone with your whole heart. The day the contractors finished and the last truck pulled out of the driveway, I drove over with a single suitcase. My son opened the front door, looked at the bag in my hand and said, "Dad, the suite didn't work out. We needed the space for something else. There's no room for you here." He handed me back the key I had given him, my key to the home I had funded, and he closed the door. The next morning I had 89 missed calls from him. Before I tell you what I did about it, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Hit the like button if you believe a parent's love should never be used as a transaction. And subscribe to Voice of Old Man if you think dignity is worth fighting for at any age. I am 67 years old. I built a regional commercial construction company from a single crew and a pickup truck with 180,000 miles on the odometer. I spent 34 years on job sites, in boardrooms, in courtrooms, negotiating with contractors who wanted to cheat me and city officials who wanted to slow me down. I outlasted all of them. I retired 4 years ago when my wife asked me to. She was sick and she wanted me present, not always on the phone in the next room. I gave it up without a second thought. 18 months after I retired, she was gone. Pancreatic cancer. It took her in 7 weeks from diagnosis to the last breath. The house we had built together, a 4-bedroom colonial in Northern Virginia, became the quietest place I had ever been inside. My son called 2 weeks after the funeral. He sat at the kitchen table where his mother used to drink her morning coffee, and he laid out the plan. He had been married 6 years. I had 2 grandchildren, a boy of 8 and a girl of 5. They lived in a 3-bedroom house 40 minutes away in a neighborhood that was fine, but not the one my daughter-in-law had her eye on. She always had her eye on something just beyond reach. It was an admirable quality in a person willing to work for things. On her, it had become a lifestyle funded entirely by other people. "We can't afford the renovation ourselves, Dad," my son told me. "But if you come in as a partner, invest in the house, we build you the suite, and you're never alone again. You'd be family, not a guest." I remember the way he said family, like it was a gift he was offering me, not a word that had described us our entire lives. I agreed. Of course I agreed. What else does a 67-year-old widower do when his only son hands him a reason not to eat dinner standing over the sink? What I did not know then, the suite was never in the plans. My daughter-in-law had taken the rough estimate I approved, $40,000 for the addition, and quietly redirected it. The addition was reduced to a coat of paint on a room that had been a storage closet, 12 square feet of drywall, and a can of Benjamin Moore. The rest went to the kitchen, the floors, the soaking tub, and a custom walk-in closet she had designed by a specialist she flew in from Charlotte. I did not know any of this as I drove over with my suitcase on that Tuesday afternoon in October. I was thinking about my wife. I was thinking she would have liked the idea of family under one roof. The drive home from my son's doorstep took 34 minutes. I counted every one of them. I did not cry. What I felt was something colder than grief, the particular chill of finally understanding something you had been refusing to see. My hands were steady on the wheel. My mind was already working. I drove to a diner 3 miles from my old office, sat in a corner booth, and ordered black coffee. I pulled out my reading glasses and opened the banking app on my phone. I was still listed as a joint account holder on the renovation account. My son had needed my name on it to secure the contractor agreements. I began to read the transaction history. I took my time. The $95,000 transfer was there, as expected. What was not expected was how it had been spent. The addition, the suite, the reason for all of it had cost $11,200. The master bath renovation had cost $28,000. The kitchen had cost $31,000. The flooring was $14,500. The closet design and installation was $8,900. There were miscellaneous charges totaling another $4,000 I could not immediately identify. I sat with the numbers for a long time. The coffee went cold. I called Lenora Page that evening. She had been my attorney for 19 years, had drawn up every major contract of my professional life, and had once told a federal mediator to sit down and be quiet in a tone that ended all further discussion. She picked up on the second ring. I thought you were retired, she said. I thought my son had a conscience, I said. There was a pause. Where should we start? We started with the renovation account. Then Lenora asked me about the power of attorney. I had signed a limited medical POA in my son's name after my wife died. At his request, "You're alone now, Dad, and someone needs to be able to make decisions if something happens." I had signed it, had it notarized, and had not thought about it since. He may have been using it in contexts it doesn't cover, Lenora said carefully. Give me 48 hours. She called back in 36. My son had contacted my former business partner, a man I had sold 70% of my company to 4 years earlier, with whom I still held a 30% stake in a commercial property in Roanoke, and had introduced himself as my authorized representative. He had sent a letter on what appeared to be my letterhead, expressing my interest in selling the remaining stake. He had done this 3 weeks ago. He had also, Lenora told me, consulted an elder law attorney about the process of petitioning for guardianship over a parent. I sat with that for a moment. My son was 38 years old. He had never held a job for more than 3 years. I had paid off his car twice. I had paid for my granddaughter's preschool and my grandson's baseball league fees and the vacation they took to Myrtle Beach the summer before last. I had done these things without being asked, because a father provides, because that is what you do. What I had failed to understand for 38 years was that a man who has never faced consequences learns to see every resource around him as available for the taking. He had decided that included me. I closed my eyes in the quiet of my house and thought about my wife. She had loved our son with a specific and total devotion that I sometimes thought was the most beautiful thing about her. She had also shielded him from every hard lesson I had ever tried to teach. There was no blame in that understanding, just a sadness that sat on my chest like a stone. She was a practical woman. She would have said, "Handle it." I put on a dark suit. I had not worn it since her funeral. I found my good cufflinks in the dish on her dresser. She had given them to me for our 25th anniversary, silver, engraved with our initials, and I put them on. I checked myself in the mirror. The man looking back was not the broken widower who had been eating leftover soup most nights. He was someone else, someone I recognized from a long time ago. I called my next-door neighbor, a retired schoolteacher who had known my family for 20 years and adored my grandchildren. I asked her a favor. She said yes without hesitation. My son and daughter-in-law were hosting a housewarming party that Saturday. I knew because they had included me on the group text, perhaps as an afterthought, perhaps as a reminder that the house existed. I arrived through the back gate because I still knew the code. He had never thought to change it. I found my grandchildren first, in the yard with a babysitter running through the last hour of October daylight. My grandson sprinted across the lawn when he saw me. My granddaughter was right behind him. I held them both. I told them Grandpa had to go talk to their dad for a while, but that later they were going to have a sleepover at Miss Eleanor's next door's. And it would be an adventure. My grandson thought this was excellent. My granddaughter wanted to know if she could bring her stuffed rabbit. I told her she could bring 2. I made sure they were settled with the babysitter before I walked into the house. The kitchen looked extraordinary. The white quartz countertops caught the evening light. The farmhouse sink was exactly what my daughter-in-law had wanted. My $31,000 had done its work. She was standing at that island with a glass of rosé, laughing with her friends, looking like a woman who had absolutely everything she had ever wanted. She called me by my first name when she noticed me. She had always called me by my first name. 6 years of marriage to my son, and she had never once called me anything else. My son spotted me from across the room. For half a second, something moved behind his eyes, a flicker, fast and guilty. Then the smile appeared. He crossed the room, grabbed my shoulder, steered me toward the food table like a concierge managing an inconvenient guest. "Dad, hey! Isn't the place looking great?" "Remarkable," I said, considering. He laughed, thinking I was being gracious. He introduced me to 2 couples I didn't know as my dad, who helped make all this possible. I shook hands. I ate a small plate of food that my money had paid to cater. I watched the room. I was perfectly calm. I have spent 34 years reading rooms full of people who wanted something from me. This was not a difficult room. At 8:30, I excused myself to use the restroom. Instead, I stepped into my son's home office, the room that had been designated as my suite, and I called Lenora. Tomorrow morning, she confirmed, 9 o'clock. The county sheriff will be with us. I returned to the party for another 20 minutes. Then I said my goodbyes, told my daughter-in-law the house looked beautiful, and meant it bitterly, and walked back through the yard, where my grandchildren were being buckled into my neighbor's car for their sleepover, stuffed rabbit included. At 10:15 that night, I removed my son as joint account holder on the renovation account. I froze the one credit card of mine he had access to, one I had added him to 4 years ago for emergencies, which had been frequent and creatively defined. I reported it as compromised. I did not call him. He called me. At 11:40, my phone rang. I let it ring. I answered on the third call, made my voice thick with sleep. "Hello, who is this?" "Dad, wake up. Something happened to the card." He sounded high-pitched, tightly wound. "I tried to use it for the party tab, and it was declined. The caterer is still here." "What card?" I said. "Your card, the one you added me to." "Oh, that." I let a pause sit there. "I got a fraud alert earlier today. Someone tried to use the account for something they weren't authorized to do, so I had it frozen." A longer pause. "Someone unauthorized?" "That's what the bank said." He was quiet. I knew he was calculating. "Dad, that might have been me. I used it for some party supplies earlier. I should have asked first." He was hoping I'd say no problem, I'll call the bank right now. I said, "I'll have Lenora look into it Monday." "Monday?" "Dad, there's a caterer standing in my kitchen. Use your own card, son." Another silence, longer this time. "Right," he said very quietly. He hung up. I knew he had no card that would clear it. Lenora had pulled his credit profile. He was carrying $34,000 in personal debt, credit cards, a personal loan, 2 months behind on the home equity line they had taken out before I came along. He was a man who had been counting on $95,000 of my money and the sale of my commercial property stake to make his problems disappear. He called back 6 more times that night. By the 7th call, at 1 in the morning, he was no longer keeping his voice measured. He left a voicemail that included the phrase, "You are doing this on purpose," twice, and "I have rights" once, which told me he had been talking to the elder law attorney more than I had assumed. I slept well. I woke before sunrise, put on coffee, and sat at my wife's kitchen table while the neighborhood was still quiet. Lenora arrived at 9 with a county sheriff and a document specialist. My son opened the door in a t-shirt and basketball shorts, his eyes red from poor sleep. Behind him, his wife stood in the kitchen doorway in a silk robe, coffee cup in both hands, watching. Lenora introduced herself and presented him with 3 documents. The first was an itemized accounting of the renovation funds, showing the material misrepresentation of how the money had been spent compared to the written agreement he had signed. The second was the letter he had sent to Roanoke, along with a legal assessment of what constituted fraud in the use of a medical POA for financial representation. The third was a formal notice of my intent to pursue both civil and criminal remedies. My son read the first page and put it down. He looked at me. He looked different in the daylight, stripped of the party, stripped of the rosé and the congratulations of his friends. He looked like a man of 38 who had built nothing with his own hands. "Dad," he said, "this is a misunderstanding." "You told me there would be a suite," I said. I kept my voice flat. "You showed me a floor plan. We sat at that table and you walked me through the addition. The storage room at the end of the hall is painted beige. That is all that changed back there." He opened his mouth. "Don't," I said quietly. "Don't explain it. I have the contractor invoices. Lenora has the contractor invoices. Your wife approved every line item." My daughter-in-law moved into the room and I watched her calculate in the span of about 4 seconds how this was going to go. She was fast with calculations when the math involved her own interests. "He made all the decisions," she said, not looking at him. "I told him the suite was the priority. I told him it wasn't right." She looked at me with an expression designed to resemble grief. "I've been sick about it." There is a specific kind of lie told with genuine feeling. She told this one well. A year ago I might have believed it. "You have emails," I said, to 3 contractors redirecting the addition budget to the master closet. Lenora found them in the renovation project folder on the shared drive. She looked at Lenora. She looked at me. The grief expression didn't hold. My son turned to look at his wife. Something shifted in the room. Not dramatic, no raised voices. Just the quiet sound of a man understanding, in one clear moment, who had been steering. He looked at her the way you look at something when you finally allow yourself to see it whole. I told my son what the options were. The first, Lenora files criminal charges regarding the Roanoke letter, which is document fraud regardless of what the POA was intended to cover. The renovation funds are recovered through civil litigation. His employer, a regional marketing firm where he had finally held a position for 4 years, would be notified per standard procedure. The second, he signs a repayment agreement, $95,000 over 4 years, secured against the home equity. He resigns the medical POA. No further access to any financial account in my name. The elder law consultation ends, and he calls the Roanoke property manager himself today to explain that the letter was sent without authorization. His wife started to say something about getting her own lawyer. Lenora looked at her with the expression of a woman who has seen this particular scene many times and is not impressed by the rehearsal. "You are welcome to consult counsel," Lenora said pleasantly. "The documents will still be what they are." My son signed the repayment agreement at the kitchen table with his cooling coffee beside him. His hand didn't shake. I'll say that for him. He signed it clean, put the pen down, and looked at me, and whatever was in his face then was something I didn't recognize from his childhood or any of the years in between. It might, I thought, have been the very beginning of something real. I picked up my suitcase, the same one from Tuesday, still packed, and carried it to the front door. My daughter-in-law did not follow me. I had not expected her to. My son stood up. "Dad," he said it the way you say a word when there is nothing left attached to it. "The grandchildren are at Eleanor's," I said. "They're fine. They had a good night. Pick them up whenever you're ready." I paused at the door and looked at my son for a long moment. I thought about the boy he had been, 8 years old, following me around job sites in a hard hat 3 sizes too large, asking questions about everything. He had been curious then, interested in how things were built. I wondered when that changed. I wondered if I had been too far away to notice. "I'm going to need you to be a different person than you've been," I said. "For your children, if not for yourself. I can't do that for you, but I need you to know I am watching." I walked out into the November morning. The air was cold and clean. Lenora fell in beside me on the walkway and said nothing until we reached the sidewalk. "You okay?" she asked. "I'll let you know in a few weeks," I said. I drove home, back to the big, quiet colonial that had been too large and too silent for 18 months. I carried my suitcase upstairs and unpacked it in my own bedroom for the first time since I'd packed it. I put my good suit back in the closet. I made lunch. I ate at the table where my wife used to drink her coffee, and I let the quiet be what it was. Not a punishment, not a sentence. Just a house that was waiting to become something other than a place where I felt I was not enough. 3 weeks later, I began the paperwork for a foundation in my wife's name. It will fund vocational apprenticeships for young people in the trades, the kind of work that teaches you that things are built by hands, not handed down by the luck of whose family you were born into. My contractor from 30 years ago agreed to sit on the board. He started with about as much as I did. He understood what we were trying to build without needing it explained. My son calls now once a week, Sunday mornings. The conversations are short and getting, slowly, less uncomfortable. 2 weeks ago he asked me what I would have done differently, with him, raising him, all of it. I thought about it for a long time before I answered. I told him I would have let him fail smaller things sooner, so the failures were lessons instead of emergencies. He was quiet for a while, then he said, "I think you're right. I don't know what he'll do with that. I hope it's something." What I know now at 67 is this: being generous is not the same as being without limits. I gave freely because I loved freely, and I let that love become a silence I was afraid to interrupt. I believed for too long that a child who knows he is loved will never use that love against you. Some people will use every resource available to them, and love is just another resource if you never ask them to earn anything. The day I stopped accepting that was the day I got my life back. If you've ever written a check hoping it would bring someone closer, only to find it drove them further into who they already were, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Hit the like button, subscribe to Voice of Old Man, and leave me a comment. Would you have walked back through that door? I read every single one. I'll see you in the next story.